The gunshot echoed across the plains of Colorado Territory, 1872, as Virgil Hayden's bullet found its mark, dropping the coyote that had been stalking his herd. He lowered his rifle, eyes scanning the horizon where the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of crimson and gold. 6 months of solitude on this homestead had hardened something in him that once had been soft, and he preferred it that way. "Come on, Bishop," he called to his black and white border collie, who bounded toward him with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Let's get these cattle settled before nightfall." The wind carried the scent of approaching rain as Virgil guided his small herd of 30 cattle toward the homestead. His ranch wasn't much 300 acres with a modest 2-room cabin, a barn that needed more repairs than he cared to admit, and dreams bigger than his pocketbook could sustain. But it was his, paid for with 5 years of back-breaking work as a ranch hand for the wealthy Donovan family 2 counties over. At 32, Virgil had seen enough of the world to know what he wanted and what he didn't. The war between the states had taken his youth. His family back in Virginia had disowned him for fighting with the Union, and the woman he'd once thought to marry had found comfort in another man's arms while he was away. Solitude suited him now, just him, his dog, his horses, and his slowly growing herd. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as he secured the last of the cattle in their pen. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Virgil quickened his pace, leading his paint horse, Samson, toward the barn. "Let's get you dried off and fed," he murmured, patting the horse's muscled neck as they entered the shelter of the barn. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and manure greeted him, the scent of honest work and simple living. He removed Samson's saddle and began to brush him down, his movements practiced and efficient. Bishop circled restlessly at his feet, whining softly. "What's got into you?" Virgil asked, frowning at the dog's unusual behavior. Bishop barked once, trotting toward the back of the barn where the hay was stored. "You smell a rat. Good. Catch it." But Bishop continued to whine, looking back at Virgil with an insistence that finally made the rancher sigh and set down the brush. "Fine, show me what's so important." He followed the border collie through the barn to the far corner where bales of hay were stacked against the wall. Bishop stopped at the edge of the hay pile, his tail wagging slowly as he looked expectantly at his master. Virgil approached cautiously, one hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Raiders and outlaws weren't uncommon in these parts, and a man who didn't stay vigilant often didn't stay alive for long. As he peered around the edge of the haystack, his breath caught in his throat. There, nestled in a small hollow created between several bales, lay a young woman. She was curled on her side, her chestnut hair falling across her face, one arm wrapped protectively around a small, worn Bible pressed against her chest. Her clothes were travel-stained and threadbare, a once fine dress of faded blue cotton, now torn and patched in several places. For a moment, Virgil stood frozen, unsure if she was alive or dead. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest and released the breath he'd been holding. "Miss," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. When she didn't respond, he crouched down and gently touched her shoulder. "Miss, you can't stay here." The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were a startling shade of green, like spring grass after rain, and filled with momentary confusion before widening in alarm. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the barn wall, clutching the Bible tighter to her chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," Virgil said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "But this is my barn you're sleeping in." The woman swallowed hard, her gaze darting around as if seeking an escape route. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I just needed somewhere out of the rain. I'll go." She attempted to stand but swayed dangerously, and Virgil instinctively reached out to steady her. Up close, He could see the dark circles under her eyes and the hollowness of her cheeks. She looked as though she hadn't eaten properly in days. "When's the last time you ate something?" he asked, his tone gruff but not unkind. She hesitated, seemingly calculating whether to lie. "Yesterday morning," she finally admitted. "Some berries I found." Virgil sighed, already knowing he couldn't turn her out into the storm that was now raging outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn through the cracks in the wooden walls, followed almost immediately by a deafening crash of thunder. The woman flinched at the sound. "I've got food in the house," he said, "and it's dry there. You can stay the night and be on your way in the morning." Suspicion clouded her features. "Why would you help me?" Virgil noticed how tightly she clutched the Bible, her knuckles white with tension. Something about her desperation and the faith she clearly clung to stirred something in him, a memory of his mother, perhaps, who had read from her own Bible each night before the war had changed everything. "You prayed me here, didn't you?" he found himself saying, the words surprising even him. Her eyes widened, and for the first time a hint of something besides fear crossed her face. "How did you know?" Virgil shook his head, unsure why he'd said it. "Just a feeling. Come on before this storm gets worse." The woman hesitated, then nodded, still clutching her Bible as she followed him. Virgil grabbed a lantern, lighting it quickly as Bishop led the way out of the barn and toward the cabin. They dashed through the downpour, reaching the porch in seconds, but still getting soaked to the skin. Virgil pushed open the door, ushering the woman inside before following with Bishop at his heels. The cabin was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a doorway leading to his bedroom. A few books sat on a shelf, alongside a wooden carving of a horse that he'd whittled himself during the long winter evenings. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs while he stoked the dying embers in the fireplace, adding kindling until flames began to lick upward. The woman obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. Once the fire was crackling properly, Virgil moved to the kitchen area. "I've got some stew left from yesterday. It's not fancy, but it's filling." "Thank you," she said softly, watching his every move. As he reheated the stew in a pot over the fire, Virgil studied her from the corner of his eye. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, but there was a wariness about her that spoke of hard experiences. "I'm Virgil Hayden," he said, breaking the silence. "This is my ranch." She hesitated before responding. "Penelope Winters. Most people call me Penny." "Where are you headed, Miss Winters?" "Denver," she replied after a pause. "I have a cousin there who might take me in." "Might?" Penny's fingers traced the edges of her Bible. "We haven't spoken in years. But she's the only family I have left who would." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Virgil didn't press. Everyone had their secrets in this country, and he respected the right to keep them. He ladled the steaming stew into a bowl and placed it before her with a spoon and a chunk of bread he'd baked 2 days prior. "Eat," he said simply. Penny stared at the food for a moment, then set her Bible aside carefully and began to eat with the controlled restraint of someone who wanted to devour the meal, but was forcing herself to take small, measured bites. Virgil busied himself making coffee, giving her the privacy to eat without his staring. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups and set one beside her bowl. "Thank you," she said again, looking up at him with those remarkable green eyes. Not many would help a stranger these days. Virgil shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Storm's bad. Nobody should be out in it." They fell into silence again as Penny finished her meal and sipped at the strong, black coffee. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the cabin through the small windows. "You can take the bed," Virgil said finally. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Alarm crossed Penny's face. "I couldn't possibly. You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You look dead on your feet, and that hay couldn't have been comfortable." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It was better than the ground I slept on the night before." Virgil frowned. "You've been walking." "Denver's a good 100 miles from here." "I had a horse," she explained, her expression darkening. "But he was stolen 3 days ago while I stopped for water. I've been on foot since then." Anger flared in Virgil's chest. Horse thieves were among the lowest forms of criminals in his estimation. "Did you see who took it?" Penny shook her head. "No. I heard something, and by the time I got back to where I'd tied him, he was gone." She ran a hand through her damp hair, wincing as her fingers caught in the tangles. "I should have been more careful." "There's a basin and pitcher in the bedroom," Virgil said, standing to clear away her empty bowl. "And I can find you something dry to wear, though it'll be too big." Penny looked as though she might protest again, but exhaustion won out. "Thank you, Mr. Hayden. Your kindness won't be forgotten." "Virgil," he corrected. "Mr. Hayden was my father, and I've no desire to be him." Something in his tone must have communicated that the subject was closed, because Penny simply nodded and rose from the table, gathering her Bible. Virgil showed her to the small bedroom, provided her with one of his clean shirts to sleep in, and left her to her privacy. Back in the main room, he settled into the chair by the fire, Bishop curling at his feet. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured to the dog. "Are we being fools?" Bishop thumped his tail against the floor in response, and Virgil sighed. It had been a long time since he'd had company, longer still since that company had been female. He wasn't sure he remembered how to make proper conversation anymore, having grown accustomed to talking only to his animals. Later, as he spread a blanket on the floor near the hearth and prepared to sleep, he heard a soft murmuring from the bedroom. Penny's voice, gentle but fervent, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. Praying, he realized, and something about that knowledge settled strangely in his chest, not unpleasantly, but like the awakening of something long dormant. Virgil drifted off to sleep with the sound of rain on the roof and the distant whisper of Penny's prayers. Morning arrived with clarity and brightness, the storm having washed the world clean. Virgil rose before dawn, as was his habit, careful not to wake his guest as he slipped outside to tend to the animals. The air was cool and fresh, the puddles reflecting the pink-tinged sky as the sun began to rise. Virgil moved through his morning chores with practiced efficiency, feeding the horses and cattle, collecting eggs from the small chicken coop, and checking for any damage the storm might have caused. He was mending a section of fence that had partially collapsed under the weight of a wind-blown branch when he sensed someone watching him. Turning, he found Penny standing several yards away, once again dressed in her own clothes, which looked somewhat cleaner but still worn. Her hair was neatly braided, and some of the tension had left her face after a night of proper rest. "Good morning," she called, approaching cautiously. "I hope it's all right that I made coffee." "More than all right," Virgil replied, hammering a final nail into place before straightening. "Did you sleep well?" Penny nodded. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you." As they walked back to the cabin together, Virgil noticed how she took in everything around her with attentive eyes: the layout of the ranch, the condition of the buildings, the small garden he'd planted near the house. "You've done well here," she observed. "How long have you had this place?" "About 6 months," Virgil answered, surprised by her interest. "Bought it from a man headed to California. He'd let it run down some, but the bones are good." Inside the cabin, Penny had indeed made coffee, and Virgil was further surprised to find she'd also prepared a simple breakfast of fried eggs and the last of yesterday's bread. "You didn't have to do that," he said, feeling awkward at being served in his own home. "It's the least I could do to thank you," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Besides, I enjoy cooking when I have the chance." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Virgil's curiosity got the better of him. "Why Denver?" he asked. "If you don't mind my asking." Penny set down her fork, considering her answer. "As I said, I have a cousin there, and Denver is growing with opportunities for someone willing to work hard." She hesitated. "I need a fresh start, somewhere no one knows me, running from something." The question came out more bluntly than he'd intended. "Someone," she corrected quietly, her fingers once again finding the Bible that sat beside her plate. "My late husband's brother believes I should be his now that William is gone." Virgil's jaw tightened. "And you don't agree?" "No," Penny said firmly. "I don't. Jasper Winters was cruel to his first wife before she died, and I have no intention of becoming his second, regardless of what he or anyone else thinks is proper." The vehemence in her tone told Virgil there was more to the story, but he didn't press. "How long has your husband been gone?" "6 months," she answered. "Pneumonia took him after he fell through ice on the creek near our farm in Kansas." "I'm sorry." Penny's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, it was complicated, but I did care for him in my way." "Not love," Virgil noted. "Care? Another story there, but again, not his to pry into." "How will you get to Denver now?" he asked instead. "It's a long walk and not safe for a woman alone." Penny sighed. "I had planned to use the last of my money to buy passage on the stagecoach from the next town, but without my horse, I'm not sure I'll make it there before my funds run out on lodging and food." Virgil considered for a moment. "I have business in Elk Creek tomorrow," he said, naming the nearest settlement about 20 miles west. "It's not much more than a trading post, but the stagecoach stops there twice a week. You're welcome to ride along." Relief washed over Penny's face. "That would be very kind." "I can pay you for the trouble." "No need," Virgil shook his head. "I'm going anyway." After breakfast, Penny insisted on helping with the morning chores, and despite Virgil's initial protests, he found her to be capable and hardworking. She gathered eggs with gentle hands, helped him milk the cow, and even assisted in repairing a loose board on the chicken coop, holding nails for him as he hammered. "You've done this before," he observed as she expertly separated cream from the morning's milk. "I grew up on a farm," she explained. "My father believed in teaching his daughters practical skills alongside their brothers. My mother thought it scandalous, but it served me well when I married William and moved to his homestead." Throughout the day, Virgil found himself watching Penny when she wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired, and despite her circumstances, she carried herself with dignity. Several times, he caught himself wondering what her story truly was, what had led a woman like her to be sleeping in a stranger's barn with nothing but a Bible for comfort. That evening, after a supper of rabbit stew that Penny had prepared from a rabbit Virgil had snared the day before, they sat by the fire. Penny had her Bible open in her lap, reading by the firelight. "You find a lot of comfort in that book," Virgil observed, whittling a piece of wood that was slowly taking the shape of a small bird. Penny looked up, her finger marking her place. "I do. It's been a constant companion when everything else has changed." "I haven't opened one since the war," Virgil admitted, surprising himself with the confession. Penny studied him thoughtfully. "Which side?" "Union," he replied, "though my family in Virginia would have preferred otherwise." She nodded, understanding what he didn't say, that his choice had cost him his family. "Faith doesn't have to be complicated," she said after a moment. "Sometimes it's just knowing you're not alone, even when it feels that way." Virgil's hand stilled on his carving. "Is that what you were praying for in the barn? Not to be alone, A soft smile touched Penny's lips. In a way, I was asking for guidance, for protection. I was scared and didn't know where to turn next. She looked at him directly. And then Bishop found me, and you appeared with your lantern like something out of a parable. I'm no good Samaritan, Virgil said gruffly, uncomfortable with the comparison. Aren't you? Penny challenged gently. You took in a stranger, fed her, gave her shelter. You're even helping her continue her journey safely. Sounds rather Samaritan-like to me. Virgil returned to his whittling, unsure how to respond. He wasn't accustomed to being seen as anything but the solitary rancher he'd become, certainly not as someone worthy of biblical comparison. What were you before the war? Penny asked, changing the subject slightly. Virgil considered the question. Young, he finally said. Idealistic. I was studying to be an engineer at a college in Pennsylvania, had plans to help build bridges and railroads across the country. He shrugged. Then the war came and those plans changed. But you still built something, Penny observed, gesturing around them. This ranch, this life, you created it from almost nothing. It's not much, Virgil demurred. It's more than many have, she countered. You should be proud. Later, as they prepared to retire for the night, Virgil again insisting that Penny take the bedroom, she paused at the bedroom door. Thank you again, Virgil, she said softly, for everything. We'll leave for Elk Creek after breakfast tomorrow, he replied. Should be there by late afternoon if the weather holds. Penny nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, she simply wished him good night and closed the door gently behind her. Virgil sat by the dying fire for a long time after, Bishop's head resting on his knee as he absently stroked the dog's ears. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken so much about himself, or the last time someone had listened with such genuine interest. There was something about Penny Winters that made him want to open doors he'd long kept shut. As he finally stretched out on his blanket by the hearth, he found himself wondering what would happen when they reached Elk Creek tomorrow. Penny would board the stagecoach, continue to Denver, and he would return to his solitary existence on the ranch. The thought brought an unexpected hollowness to his chest. She needs to move on, Bishop, he murmured to the dog, and we're fine just as we are. But as he drifted towards sleep, Virgil wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. Morning came with a hazy sun that promised heat later in the day. Virgil and Penny prepared for the journey to Elk Creek efficiently, working together as if they'd done so for years rather than a single day. Virgil packed provisions and checked over the wagon while Penny prepared a meal they could eat on the road. How often do you go to town? Penny asked as she wrapped bread and cheese in a clean cloth. Every few weeks for supplies I can't produce myself, Virgil replied, securing a water barrel to the side of the wagon, and to sell excess eggs and milk when I have them. Don't you get lonely out here? The question was asked casually, but Virgil sensed genuine curiosity behind it. He paused in his work. Used to at first, now I prefer it. People tend to complicate things. Penny smiled slightly. They do at that. By mid-morning they were ready to depart. Virgil hitched his 2 draft horses, massive chestnut Belgians named Thunder and Lightning, to the wagon. He helped Penny climb onto the wooden seat, then whistled for Bishop, who bounded up to join them. What about your cattle? Penny asked as they set off down the rutted trail that would eventually lead to Elk Creek. They'll be fine for a day, Virgil assured her. They're fenced in the north pasture with plenty of water and grass, and most predators around here know better than to try their luck with full-grown longhorns. The journey to Elk Creek took them through varied terrain, rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon, patches of aspen and pine that provided welcome shade, and finally into the foothills where the settlement nestled in a small valley. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat the meal Penny had prepared, sitting in the shade of a tall cottonwood tree beside a small creek. As they ate, Virgil found himself telling Penny about his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, perhaps building a larger cabin someday, maybe even hiring help if the cattle market remained strong. "You've thought it all through," Penny observed, impressed. "You'll make it work, I'm certain." "What about you?" Virgil asked. "What will you do in Denver, assuming your cousin welcomes you?" Penny tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Find work, I suppose. I can cook, clean, so I'm good with numbers, too. I kept all the accounts for our farm in Kansas." A flash of pride crossed her face. "I might even save enough to open a small bakery someday. I've always loved baking, creating something that brings others joy." Virgil could easily imagine her in such a role, her green eyes bright as she handed fresh bread to appreciative customers. The image brought an unexpected smile to his face. "What?" Penny asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing," Virgil said quickly. "It's a good plan, practical." They continued their journey, the conversation flowing more easily than Virgil would have thought possible with someone he'd known for such a short time. Penny had a quick mind and a gentle wit that occasionally surprised a laugh out of him, a sound he realized had become rare in recent years. As they approached Elk Creek in the late afternoon, the settlement came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings along a single dirt street, the largest being a combination general store and trading post. A few houses dotted the surrounding area, smoke rising from chimneys as people prepared evening meals. "It's smaller than I expected," Penny remarked. "Like I said, not much more than a trading post," Virgil confirmed. "But it serves the ranchers and trappers in the area well enough." They pulled up in front of the general store, where a weathered sign announced Pearson's Goods and Trading in faded paint. As Virgil helped Penny down from the wagon, the store's door opened, and a barrel-chested man with a gray beard stepped out. "Virgil Hayden," the man called in greeting. "Didn't expect to see you for another week at least." "Change of plans, Amos," Virgil replied, shaking the older man's hand. "This is Miss Penelope Winters. She's hoping to catch the stagecoach to Denver." Amos Pearson studied Penny with undisguised curiosity. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Winters." "Friend of Virgil's, are you?" Before Penny could answer, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of riders was approaching, 5 men on horseback, dust rising behind them as they cantered toward the store. Virgil instinctively stepped closer to Penny, something about the riders setting his nerves on edge. As they drew nearer, he could see they were a rough-looking bunch, trail-worn clothes, unshaven faces, and hard eyes that scanned the settlement with predatory interest. The lead rider, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, reined his horse to a stop before the store. His gaze swept over them before settling on Penny, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it isn't the grieving widow Winters." "Fancy meeting you here, Penelope." Virgil felt Penny stiffen beside him, her face draining of color. "Jasper," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Understanding dawned on Virgil immediately. This was the brother-in-law Penny had been fleeing, the man who believed she should be his now that her husband was dead. "You've led us on quite a chase," Jasper Winters continued, dismounting with fluid grace that belied his size. The other riders remained on their horses, watching the exchange with varying degrees of interest. Jasper's been worried sick about his poor, confused sister-in-law, wandering the wilderness in her grief. "I'm not confused," Penny replied, her voice stronger now despite the fear Virgil could sense radiating from her. "And I made it clear I have no intention of returning with you." Jasper's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice, Penny." A woman alone has few options in this world, and you know it. Besides, he added with a nasty smile, we're practically family already. Virgil stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Penny. The lady's made her choice clear, he said evenly, his hand instinctively moving closer to the revolver at his hip. I suggest you respect it and move on. Jasper's eyes narrowed as he assessed Virgil. And who might you be? Another poor fool she's wrapped around her finger. Virgil Hayden, he replied coldly. Miss Winters is under my protection while she's in Elk Creek. One of the riders behind Jasper snickered. Looks like the widow's found herself a new man already, Jasper. Didn't take long, did it? Jasper silenced the man with a sharp glance before returning his attention to Virgil. This doesn't concern you, Hayden. Penny is my brother's widow, and it's my responsibility to see to her welfare. I can see to my own welfare, Penny interjected firmly. I'm going to Denver, Jasper. My mind is made up. Denver, Jasper laughed without humor. To do what? Work as a laundress or perhaps something less respectable. William would turn in his grave. William is dead, Penny said bluntly, and I owe you nothing. Tension crackled in the air as Jasper took a step forward, his hand now resting on his own pistol. I didn't ride all this way to return empty-handed, Penny. You're coming with me one way or another. Amos Pearson, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, cleared his throat. Now, gentlemen, there's no need for trouble. Perhaps we could all calm down and discuss this civilly inside. My wife's just put on a pot of coffee. Jasper didn't take his eyes off Virgil. There's nothing to discuss. The woman is coming with me. No, Virgil said simply. She isn't. For a tense moment, it seemed Jasper might draw his weapon. Virgil stood his ground, acutely aware of the 4 other men still mounted behind Jasper, all likely armed. Then, unexpectedly, Jasper smiled and took a step back. Fine. Have it your way for now. He turned to Penny. Think carefully, Penny. You have nowhere to go, little money, and no protection beyond this stranger who'll tire of your troubles soon enough. I'll be at the saloon when you come to your senses. With that, he remounted his horse and signaled to his companions. They rode further down the street to the small, dilapidated building that served as Elk Creek's only saloon. As soon as they were out of earshot, Penny released a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she said to Virgil. I never expected him to follow me this far. Man's determined, I'll give him that, Amos commented, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Miss Winters, I think it best if you come inside while we sort this out. Inside the general store, which also served as Amos and his wife Martha's home, they gathered around a sturdy oak table while Martha poured coffee and regarded Penny with motherly concern. The stagecoach isn't due until tomorrow afternoon, Amos informed them, accepting a cup from his wife. And I don't like the idea of Miss Winters waiting around with those men in town. Neither do I, Virgil agreed grimly. Winters doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily. He isn't, Penny confirmed, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if seeking its warmth despite the summer heat. He tracked me from Kansas to a town in eastern Colorado where I stayed for 2 weeks. I thought I'd lost him when I headed north. Martha patted Penny's shoulder sympathetically. You poor dear, what a terrible situation. Could she stay here tonight? Virgil asked Amos. I'd feel better knowing she wasn't alone at the boarding house. Amos exchanged a glance with Martha, who nodded immediately. Of course she can, Martha said firmly. We have a spare room upstairs. Those men won't bother her here. And what about you, Virgil? Amos asked. Will you head back to your ranch tonight? Virgil considered the question, looking at Penny's worried face. No, he decided. I'll stay in town until the stagecoach leaves tomorrow. I don't trust Winters not to try something. Relief visibly washed over Penny. Thank you, she said softly. You've already done so much. I hate to impose further." "It's no imposition," Virgil assured her, surprising himself with how much he meant it. The thought of leaving Penny to face Jasper alone was unthinkable, though he couldn't quite explain why he felt so protective of her after such a short acquaintance. The remainder of the afternoon passed tensely. Virgil completed his business with Amos, purchasing supplies and selling his extra goods, all the while keeping an eye on the saloon down the street. Occasionally, one of Jasper's men would emerge, look around, and return inside, but Jasper himself remained out of sight. As evening approached, Amos closed the store, and Martha prepared a hearty dinner for them all. Despite the circumstances, the meal was pleasant, with Martha's cheerful conversation helping to ease some of the tension. Penny even smiled occasionally, especially when Martha shared embarrassing stories about Amos's early courtship of her nearly 30 years earlier. "He was so nervous the first time he called on me that he brought flowers for my mother but forgot something for me entirely," Martha recalled with a fond laugh. "Poor man was mortified when he realized his mistake." "In my defense," Amos protested good-naturedly, "your mother was a formidable woman. I was more afraid of her disapproval than yours." "How did you two meet?" Penny asked, genuinely interested. Martha's eyes twinkled. "At a church social." Amos had just opened his first small trading post near Denver, and I was teaching at the local school. He asked me to dance, stepped all over my feet, and somehow still charmed me into a second dance. "She took pity on me," Amos added with a wink. "Been taking pity on me ever since." Watching them, Virgil was struck by the easy affection between the older couple, the small touches, the knowing glances, the shared memories that had built a life together. It was something he'd once thought might be possible for himself, before the war had changed everything. After dinner, as Martha cleared the dishes with Penny's help, Amos drew Virgil aside. "Those men at the saloon worry me," the older man confided in a low voice. "They've been drinking steadily since they arrived, and Joe Miller, he runs the place, sent word they're getting rowdy. Might be best if you stayed here tonight too, rather than at the boarding house." Virgil nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "I appreciate that, Amos. I don't want to leave Penny unprotected." Amos studied him thoughtfully. "Known her long, have you?" "No," Virgil admitted. "Found her in my barn just 2 days ago during that big storm. She was exhausted, half-starved." Amos stroked his beard again. "Interesting how quickly we can find ourselves caring for someone, isn't it?" Before Virgil could respond or deny the implication, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then a gunshot split the night air. Virgil was moving instantly, his revolver drawn as he headed for the door. "Stay inside," he instructed Penny and Martha sharply. "Amos, watch over them." Stepping onto the porch, Virgil saw a chaotic scene unfolding near the saloon. 2 of Jasper's men were engaged in a fistfight with some local cowboys, while another fired his pistol into the air, seemingly trying to break up the fight. Of Jasper himself, there was no sign. Instinct made Virgil glance toward the back of the store, and his blood ran cold. A shadowy figure was moving stealthily around the building, heading for the rear entrance. Even in the dim light, Virgil recognized Jasper's tall form. Moving quickly but quietly, Virgil circled around the opposite side of the store, intending to intercept Jasper before he could enter the building. The disturbance at the saloon had clearly been a diversion, meant to draw attention while Jasper made his move. As Virgil rounded the corner, he spotted Jasper just as the man reached for the back door handle. "Winters," he called coldly, his revolver trained on the man's chest. "Step away from the door," Jasper froze, then slowly turned to face Virgil, his hands raising slightly. Hayden, you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. And you're more predictable, Virgil countered. Creating a distraction so you could sneak in and take Penny, not very original. A humorless smile crossed Jasper's face. A man uses what works, and I intend to leave with what's mine. Penny isn't yours, Virgil said, his voice hard. She's not property to be claimed. She was my brother's wife, Jasper insisted, a hint of genuine emotion breaking through his calculated demeanor. William would have wanted me to care for her, to protect her. Is that what you tell yourself? Virgil asked. That you're honoring your brother's wishes by terrorizing his widow? Jasper's expression darkened. You know nothing about it, stranger, nothing about our history, our family. I know Penny is afraid of you, Virgil replied steadily, and that's enough for me to stand between you and that door. For a long moment, they stood facing each other in the deepening twilight, neither man willing to back down. Then, subtly, Jasper's posture shifted, his right hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. Don't, Virgil warned, his own grip tightening on his revolver. Jasper paused, then laughed softly. You'd really shoot a man for a woman you barely know. She must be even more persuasive than I thought. I'd shoot a man who's threatening someone under my protection, Virgil corrected. Now back away from the door and return to your friends at the saloon. The stagecoach leaves tomorrow and Penny will be on it. After that, you'll have no reason to remain in Elk Creek. Something calculating entered Jasper's gaze. And if I challenge you to a fair fight, man to man, for the right to take Penny home where she belongs. She's not a prize to be won, Virgil said disgustedly. And there's nothing fair about forcing a woman to go somewhere against her will. The back door opened suddenly, revealing Amos with a shotgun in his hands. Everything all right out here, Virgil? He asked, though his eyes remained fixed on Jasper. Mr. Winters was just leaving, Virgil replied evenly. Weren't you, Winters? Jasper's jaw tightened, but with both men's weapons trained on him, he had little choice. This isn't over, he warned, backing away slowly. Not by a long shot. It is for tonight, Amos said firmly. Now get back to the saloon and collect your friends before I fetch the sheriff from the next county. With a final, venomous glance at Virgil, Jasper turned and disappeared into the darkness. Once he was gone, Virgil lowered his weapon with a long exhale. He'll try again. Probably, Amos agreed grimly. But we'll be ready. Come inside, the women are worried. Inside, they found Penny and Martha in the kitchen, both visibly relieved to see them unharmed. Penny's face was pale, but her eyes were clear and determined as she looked at Virgil. It was a distraction, wasn't it? She asked. The fight at the saloon, Virgil nodded. Jasper tried to get in through the back door. He's gone for now, but I don't think he's given up. He never does, Penny said quietly, her fingers finding the small Bible she kept in her pocket. Not until he gets what he wants. Well, he won't get it this time, Martha declared firmly. Not while we have anything to say about it. Despite Martha's confidence, they took precautions that night. Virgil insisted on sleeping downstairs near the doors, his revolver within easy reach. Amos kept his shotgun nearby as well, and they took turns keeping watch throughout the night. Penny slept fitfully in the small room upstairs, her dreams troubled by memories and fears. Shortly before dawn, she gave up on sleep entirely and crept downstairs, careful not to wake Martha in the adjoining room. She found Virgil awake, sitting by the window that overlooked the street, his profile outlined by the faint pre-dawn light. He turned at her approach, instantly alert. You should be resting, he said softly. I couldn't sleep, Penny admitted, sinking into a chair across from him. Too many thoughts. Virgil nodded in understanding. After a moment's hesitation, he asked, why is he so determined? Surely there are other women who would be more willing. Penny's hands twisted in her lap. It's complicated. Partly it's because of the farm, it was good land, and when William died, it passed to me. Jasper believes it should stay in the Winters family. She paused. But it's more than that. Jasper has always wanted what William had. Even when we were first courting, Jasper would watch us with this look in his eyes. And your husband, did he know? I think so, on some level, Penny replied thoughtfully. But William preferred to ignore unpleasantness. He always believed the best of people, especially his brother. A sad smile touched her lips. It was one of his better qualities, even if it was sometimes misplaced. Virgil studied her in the growing light. You didn't love him, he observed, not a question but a statement. Penny met his gaze directly. No, she admitted. Not as a wife should love a husband. He was kind to me, and I respected him, but... She shook her head. My father arranged the marriage. William needed a wife to help on the farm, and my father needed one less mouth to feed after the drought took most of our crops. The matter-of-fact way she described it stirred something in Virgil's chest: admiration for her resilience, anger at the circumstances that had shaped her choices. And now, he asked, what do you want for yourself? The question seemed to surprise her, as if no one had ever asked it before. Freedom, she said after a moment's reflection. The chance to make my own decisions, to build something that's truly mine. She looked down at her hands. I know it sounds foolish. Not foolish at all, Virgil said quietly. Everyone deserves that chance. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began to rise, painting the small room in soft golden light. Virgil found himself studying Penny's profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the way the morning light caught in her chestnut hair. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Thank you, Penny said suddenly, turning to meet his gaze. For everything. For taking me in when you found me in your barn, for bringing me here, for standing up to Jasper. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to, Virgil replied, surprising himself with the depth of feeling in his voice. Knowing you'll be safe, that you'll have your chance at freedom, that's enough. A look passed between them then, something unspoken but powerful. Penny's eyes softened, and for a moment, Virgil thought she might say more. But the sound of movement upstairs broke the moment as Martha and Amos began to stir. The morning passed with tense anticipation. Amos kept the store closed, citing inventory as the reason, though everyone knew the real purpose was to keep Penny safely inside until the stagecoach arrived. Virgil checked and rechecked his revolver, and Amos positioned himself by the window, watching the saloon where Jasper and his men had taken rooms for the night. Shortly after noon, the distant sound of hoofbeats and creaking wheels announced the stagecoach's approach. It was right on schedule, a welcome bit of normalcy in the tense atmosphere. Time to go, Amos announced as the coach pulled up in front of the general store, 4 dusty horses snorting and stamping after their long run. Penny gathered her few belongings, her Bible, a small bundle of clothes, and a package of food Martha had insisted on preparing for her journey. She hugged Martha warmly, thanked Amos for his protection, then turned to Virgil. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice catching slightly. Before Virgil could respond, the door to the saloon down the street burst open and Jasper emerged, followed by his 4 companions. They mounted quickly, Jasper's gaze fixed on the stagecoach with predatory intensity. Damn, Virgil muttered. He's not giving up. What do we do? Penny asked, fear evident in her voice despite her attempt to remain calm. Virgil made a split-second decision. Change of plans. You're not taking the stagecoach. What? Penny looked bewildered. But it's my only way to Denver. Jasper expects you to be on that coach, Virgil explained quickly. They could easily overtake it once it's out of town, especially with 5 riders. He turned to Amos. Can you delay them? Make them think Penny's still inside while we slip out the back. Amos nodded grimly. I can do better than that. I'll tell the driver to spread word that a young woman paid for passage but never showed up. Might buy you some time while they try to figure out where she went. Where exactly am I going? Penny asked, confusion clear on her face. Virgil met her gaze steadily. Back to my ranch for now. It's the last place Jasper would look, and it'll give us time to figure out a safer way to get you to Denver. For a moment, Penny hesitated, clearly torn. Then she nodded decisively. All right, I trust you. Those 3 simple words affected Virgil more deeply than he expected. Go with Martha, he instructed. Get to the wagon behind the store. I'll join you in a moment. As Penny and Martha slipped out through the storage room, Virgil turned to Amos. I need one more favor. Name it, the older man replied without hesitation. If Jasper comes asking, tell him Penny took the stagecoach but got off at Willow Creek to catch the train east. Should send him in the opposite direction of my ranch. Amos clasped Virgil's shoulder. Consider it done. Now go, before they decide to search the store. With a grateful nod, Virgil hurried through the back of the store to where his wagon waited. Martha was already helping Penny into the back, where she could lie low beneath a tarp, concealed from view. God be with you both, Martha whispered, pressing a small package into Virgil's hands. Extra provisions for the journey. Virgil thanked her, then climbed onto the driver's seat and took up the reins. With a final glance toward the front of the store, where he could see Jasper and his men approaching the stagecoach, he urged thunder and lightning forward, guiding the wagon away from Elk Creek by a back trail that few knew existed. They traveled in tense silence for the first few miles, Virgil constantly checking behind them for signs of pursuit. Only when they reached the cover of a dense stand of pines did he signal for Penny to emerge from her hiding place. She climbed carefully onto the seat beside him, her face flushed from the heat under the tarp. Do you think it worked? She asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. So far, Virgil replied, keeping his voice calm despite his own concerns. We're taking a roundabout way back to the ranch. It'll add a few hours to the journey, but it's safer. Penny nodded, then surprised him by saying, I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to your doorstep. You've barely known me 3 days, and now you're risking everything to help me. Virgil considered her words as the wagon rolled steadily through the pine forest. 3 days can be enough, he finally said, to know someone's worth helping. A soft smile touched Penny's lips. Even someone who prayed you into rescuing her from a barn. Despite the circumstances, Virgil found himself returning her smile. Especially her. The journey back to the ranch took well into the evening, the sun setting in a spectacular display of orange and crimson as they finally emerged from the forest onto the open range. In the distance, Virgil's cabin stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a beacon of safety. As they approached, Bishop bounded out to meet them, barking joyfully at their return. The sight of the dog's enthusiastic welcome lightened the mood considerably, and Penny even laughed as Bishop jumped up to greet her once she climbed down from the wagon. He remembers you, Virgil observed, pleased by the dog's reaction. And I remember him, Penny replied, scratching behind Bishop's ears. My rescuer. The cabin was exactly as they had left it the day before, though it felt different somehow to Virgil, now warmer perhaps, or simply less empty. He lit the lamps while Penny tended to the cold fireplace, working together with the same easy efficiency they had developed in their short time together. Once the fire was crackling and Virgil had seen to the horses, they sat at the table with cups of coffee, the events of the day settling around them like dust after a storm. "What happens now?" Penny asked quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Virgil considered the question carefully. "We wait a few days, let things settle. Then I can take you to a different town, one where you can catch the train directly to Denver without having to use the stagecoach. And if Jasper finds us here, he won't," Virgil said with more confidence than he entirely felt. "But if he does, we'll deal with it." His hand unconsciously moved to the revolver he still wore at his hip. "I won't let him force you into anything, Penny. I give you my word on that." Gratitude and something deeper shone in Penny's eyes. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do all this for me?" Virgil found himself at a loss for words, unable to articulate the complex emotions that had been building within him since he'd found her in his barn. How could he explain that in just 3 days she had awakened something in him that he'd thought long dead, a desire for connection, for purpose beyond mere survival? "Because it's right," he finally said simply. "And because—" He hesitated, then finished honestly, "because I've come to care what happens to you." The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than its simple words might suggest. Penny's expression softened, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I've come to care what happens to you too," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should, perhaps, given how little time we've known each other." Virgil reached across the table, hesitating briefly before covering her hand with his own. "Time isn't always the best measure of such things." They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and gaze, the crackling fire and Bishop's contented sighs the only sounds in the cabin. It was Penny who finally broke the silence, gently withdrawing her hand. "I should rest," she said, though she made no move to rise. "It's been a long day." Virgil nodded, standing to prepare the bedroom for her use again. As he did so, a thought occurred to him. "Tomorrow I should check the cattle in the north pasture. Would you like to ride out with me? It might do you good to get some fresh air, and it's beautiful country." Penny's face brightened at the suggestion. "I'd like that very much. It's been a long time since I rode just for pleasure." That night, as Virgil lay on his bedroll by the fire, he found himself thinking not of the dangers they might still face, but of the day ahead, of showing Penny his land, of seeing her smile in the sunlight. It was a strange feeling, this anticipation, this desire to share something of himself with another person after so long alone. Bishop whined softly in his sleep, paws twitching as he chased some dream rabbit, and Virgil smiled in the darkness. "Things are changing, boy," he murmured. "For better or worse, I'm not sure yet." But as he drifted toward sleep, Virgil realized that for the first time in years he was hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. Morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for riding. After a hearty breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, Virgil saddled Samson for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for Penny. "She's steady," he assured Penny as he helped her mount. "Won't give you any trouble." Penny settled comfortably in the saddle, adjusting her borrowed skirts. "She's lovely," she said, stroking the mare's cream-colored neck. "I used to ride quite a bit before. Well, before William fell ill. He needed me at the farm more then." They set out with Bishop trotting happily alongside, heading northwest toward the pasture where Virgil's small herd grazed. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in summer gold grass, stands of aspen with their leaves fluttering in the breeze, and always the majestic mountains rising in the distance, their peaks still bearing traces of snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Penny breathed, taking in the scenery with evident delight. "So open and free." "That's what drew me here," Virgil admitted, watching her reaction with pleasure. "After the war, after Virginia, I needed space to breathe." The mountains make a man feel small in the right way, reminds you that your troubles aren't as big as they seem. They rode at a leisurely pace, Virgil pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his early days on the ranch. Penny listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her own knowledge of ranching and farming. She had a quick mind and practical insights that impressed Virgil more with each passing hour. When they reached the north pasture, they found the cattle grazing contentedly, fat and healthy under Virgil's careful management. He dismounted to check the water source and mend a small section of fence while Penny watched from Daisy's back, offering suggestions that proved remarkably useful. "You have a good eye for this work," Virgil observed as they prepared to return to the cabin. Penny smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "I managed most of the practical aspects of our farm in Kansas. William was more interested in the business side, selling the crops, negotiating prices. But the day-to-day running of things fell to me." "You enjoyed it," Virgil noted. "It wasn't a question." "I did," she confirmed. "There's satisfaction in working the land and seeing something grow because of your efforts." She glanced around at the thriving pasture. "You must feel it too." Virgil nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "It's honest work. At the end of the day, you can see what you've accomplished." They rode for a while in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Penny asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here? Truly lonely, I mean." The question caught Virgil off guard with its directness, but he considered it seriously. "Yes," he admitted finally. "More than I like to acknowledge sometimes. Winter's the worst days when the snow's too deep to go anywhere and the only voice you hear is your own, talking to the dog." He glanced at her. "What about you? Were you lonely in your marriage?" It was a personal question, perhaps too personal, but Penny didn't seem offended. "Yes," she said simply, "but in a different way. It's possible to be lonely even with someone else present, when there's no real understanding between you. You and William didn't understand each other." Penny sighed softly. "William was a good man, in many ways hardworking, honest, kind in his fashion, but he never really saw me, I think. To him, I was a wife, someone to cook and clean and help with the farm. The idea that I might have thoughts or dreams beyond that." She shook her head. It wouldn't have occurred to him to ask. Something in Virgil's chest tightened at her words. "What are they?" he asked. "Your dreams, beyond the bakery you mentioned." Penny looked surprised, then pleased by the question. "To learn," she said after a moment's reflection. "There's so much I don't know, so many books I haven't read, and to see more of the world than just Kansas and Colorado. To stand by the ocean someday, perhaps." She laughed self-consciously. "Simple things, really." "Not simple at all," Virgil disagreed. "Important things. The things that make a life worth living." They had reached a small stream, and Virgil suggested they stop to rest the horses and eat the lunch Martha had packed for them. They sat on a fallen log, watching the clear water bubble over smooth stones while Bishop cooled himself in the shallows. "What about you?" Penny asked as they shared bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. "What dreams did you have before the war changed everything?" Virgil hadn't spoken of such things in years, had barely allowed himself to think of them. But there was something about Penny, her genuine interest, her lack of judgment, that made it easier to remember. "I wanted to build things," he said slowly. "Bridges, primarily. I had this idea that connecting places, making it easier for people to reach each other, was important work." He smiled ruefully. "Ironic, considering how I've lived these past years, as disconnected as possible." "It's not too late," Penny observed gently, "for those dreams." Virgil glanced at her, struck by her faith in possibilities he'd long since abandoned. "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But some dreams change with time. Now I'm content to build this ranch, to create something lasting in my own small way." "That's still building," Penny pointed out. "Still creating connections, just of a different kind." Her understanding touched something deep within him, a recognition that went beyond words. For a moment, Virgil allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to have her here permanently, her insights, her gentle strength, her presence bringing warmth to the cabin that had always seemed just a place to sleep rather than a true home. The thought both enticed and alarmed him. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to want something beyond his immediate needs, to hope for a future that included another person. They returned to the cabin as the afternoon waned, the conversation flowing easily between them on subjects both profound and mundane. Penny shared stories of her childhood in Missouri before her family moved to Kansas, and Virgil found himself recounting tales of his college days that he hadn't remembered in years. That evening, they prepared supper together, moving around the small kitchen with a synchronicity that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. As they ate, Virgil found himself watching Penny the way she gestured when making a point, the small smile that would appear when Bishop laid his head on her lap, the thoughtful expression that crossed her face when she considered a question before answering. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Nothing," Virgil replied, slightly embarrassed at being caught staring. "Just thinking that you seem more at ease today." "I am," Penny acknowledged. "Being here, away from Jasper and the constant fear of him finding me, it's a relief I can't properly express." She hesitated, then added softly, "And being with you makes me feel safe in a way I haven't in a very long time." The simple honesty of her statement affected Virgil deeply. "You are safe here," he assured her, "for as long as you need to be." After supper, they sat by the fire, Penny with her Bible open in her lap, Virgil working on a piece of wood he was carving into the shape of a horse. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck Virgil suddenly, how natural it felt to have her there, how the cabin seemed more like a home with her presence. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the Bible. Penny looked up with a smile. "The Book of Ruth. It's always been one of my favorites." "I don't remember that one well," Virgil admitted. His own knowledge of the Bible had faded over the years since his mother had read it to him as a child. "It's about a woman who leaves her homeland to follow her mother-in-law after both their husbands die," Penny explained. "She finds herself in a strange land, dependent on the kindness of others, particularly a man named Bose who eventually becomes her husband." Her cheeks colored slightly. "It's a story of loyalty, kindness, and finding love in unexpected places." The parallel to their own situation wasn't lost on Virgil. "And does it end well for Ruth?" he asked, his voice lower than he'd intended. "Yes," Penny replied softly. "It does." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither had anticipated, but both now felt. The moment was broken by Bishop's sudden alert bark. The dog jumped to his feet, hackles raised as he faced the door, emitting a low growl that Virgil had learned to trust. "Someone's coming," he said quietly, setting aside his carving and reaching for his revolver. "Stay here." Virgil moved to the window, peering cautiously into the gathering darkness. At first he saw nothing, but then the distant sound of hoofbeats reached his ears, growing steadily louder. Bishop continued to growl, his body tense with anticipation. "How many?" Penny asked, her voice steady despite the fear that had returned to her eyes. Virgil strained to hear. "More than one rider, at least 3, maybe 4. "Jasper," Penny whispered, her hands instinctively finding her Bible. "It has to be." The realization hit Virgil with cold clarity. Someone in Elk Creek must have talked, maybe saw which direction we headed. He moved quickly to the door, checking that it was securely barred. "We don't have much time." Penny stood, her face pale but determined. "What do we do?" Virgil's mind raced through their options. The cabin was sturdy but not built for defense. There were too many windows, too many ways for determined men to enter. And while he was confident in his ability with a gun, facing 4 or 5 armed men alone wasn't a fight he was likely to win. "The root cellar," he decided quickly. "Behind the cabin. It's small, but it's well hidden." He gathered ammunition for his revolver and grabbed his rifle from its place near the door. "We'll take shelter there until we know what they want." "And if what they want is me?" Penny asked, the fear in her voice tempered by resolve. Virgil met her gaze directly. "Then they'll have to go through me to get you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, its implications clear. In that moment, Virgil knew with absolute certainty that he would risk his life to protect her, not out of some abstract sense of duty or honor, but because the thought of harm coming to her was suddenly, viscerally intolerable. With no time to examine this revelation further, Virgil led Penny out the back door of the cabin, Bishop following silently at their heels. The root cellar was built into a small rise behind the cabin, its entrance partially concealed by a cluster of serviceberry bushes. Virgil had dug it himself during his first months on the ranch, knowing that proper food storage would be essential for surviving the harsh winters. He lifted the heavy wooden door, revealing a set of earthen steps leading down into darkness. "Quickly," he urged, handing Penny the rifle while he lit a small lantern. "It's not comfortable, but it's safer than the cabin if they mean trouble." Penny descended without hesitation, Bishop following close behind her. Virgil handed down the lantern, then joined them, pulling the door closed above them. The cellar was cool and smelled of earth and the vegetables stored on rough wooden shelves along one wall. It was perhaps 8 feet square, with a ceiling low enough that Virgil had to stoop slightly. "Now we wait," he whispered, positioning himself near the steps, revolver ready. "And listen." Above them, the sound of approaching riders grew louder until it stopped, presumably in front of the cabin. Muffled voices reached them, then the sharp knock of a fist against the cabin door. "Hayden." A voice called Jasper's voice, unmistakable even through the layers of earth and wood separating them. "I know you're in there. Bring Penny out and we can discuss this reasonably." Silence followed his demand. Then the sound of boots on the porch, more voices conferring. "Check around back," Jasper ordered, his voice growing fainter as he moved away from the door. Virgil tensed, his grip tightening on his revolver. If they searched thoroughly enough, they would find the root cellar eventually. Penny seemed to realize this too, her face pale in the lantern light as she clutched the rifle he had given her. "If they find us," she whispered, so softly he barely heard her, "I want you to know that these past days with you have been the first time in years I've felt truly seen, truly valued." The simple honesty of her words struck Virgil to his core. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps overhead silenced them both. Someone was walking around the area above the cellar, their boots sending small showers of dirt down from between the rough boards of the ceiling. Bishop growled softly, and Virgil placed a hand on the dog's head, silently commanding him to be quiet. The footsteps paused directly overhead, and for a heart-stopping moment, Virgil thought they had been discovered. Then the steps moved on, gradually fading as whoever it was returned to the front of the cabin. More voices, too muffled to make out clearly. The sound of breaking glass, a window being smashed, Virgil guessed, anger flaring at the destruction of his home. Then, after what seemed an eternity but was probably only minutes, the sound of horses moving off, hoofbeats growing fainter until they faded entirely. Still, Virgil waited, counting silently to 300 before finally relaxing his grip on the revolver. "They might have left someone behind," he whispered to Penny. "I'll go check. You stay here with Bishop until I come back for you." Penny nodded, though fear for him was evident in her eyes. On impulse, Virgil reached out and squeezed her hand briefly before climbing the steps and cautiously pushing open the cellar door. The night was quiet, the half-moon providing enough light for him to see that the immediate area was clear. Moving silently, revolver ready, Virgil approached the cabin. The back door stood ajar, and he could see that the front window had indeed been smashed. With utmost caution he entered, checking each corner, ensuring no one remained hidden inside. What he found instead was destruction. Jasper and his men had vented their frustration on his possessions, the table overturned, his few dishes smashed, the mattress slashed open with feathers scattered across the floor. On the wall above the fireplace, scratched deeply into the wood with what must have been a knife, were the words, "I'll be back." Anger rose in Virgil's throat like bile, but he forced it down. The damage was just to things, not people. Things could be replaced or repaired. What mattered was that Penny was safe. After thoroughly checking the barn and finding the horses undisturbed small mercies, Virgil thought grimly he returned to the root cellar. Penny's face flooded with relief when she saw him. "Are they gone?" she asked as he helped her up the steps, Bishop bounding ahead of them. "For now," Virgil confirmed, not wanting to alarm her further, "but they did some damage to the cabin." The extent of that damage became clear when they re-entered the house. Penny gasped at the destruction, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Virgil," she breathed, "this is my fault, all of it." "No," he said firmly, turning to face her. "This is Jasper's doing, not yours. You're not responsible for his actions." Tears welled in Penny's eyes. "But if I hadn't come here, if you hadn't helped me—" "Stop," Virgil interrupted gently. "I chose to help you, knowing there might be consequences. I don't regret it." He glanced around at the mess. "This is just things, nothing that can't be fixed." Together, they began to clean up, righting the furniture, sweeping up broken glass and pottery, gathering the scattered feathers from the slashed mattress. It was well past midnight by the time they had restored some semblance of order to the cabin, though the broken window would have to wait until morning for repair. "You should rest," Virgil said, noting how exhaustion had etched itself into Penny's features. "Take my bedroll by the fire. I'll keep watch in case they return." Penny looked as though she might argue, but weariness won out. She settled onto the bedroll, Bishop curling protectively beside her. Virgil took a chair positioned where he could see both doors and the broken window, his revolver within easy reach. For a long time, he watched Penny sleep, her face gradually relaxing as tension gave way to exhaustion. In the flickering firelight, with her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, and her hand still resting on her Bible, she looked both vulnerable and remarkably strong, a woman who had faced hardship with courage and dignity. Something shifted in Virgil's chest as he watched her, a certainty taking root where uncertainty had been. He had been alone for so long, convinced that solitude was safer than connection, that independence was preferable to the messy complications of caring for another person. Yet in just a few days, Penny had upended those beliefs, showing him that there could be strength in connection, freedom in caring. The realization both terrified and exhilarated him. It had been so long since he had allowed himself to want something beyond the next day, the next season. So long since he had imagined a future that included someone beside him. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Virgil made a decision. When Penny woke, he would speak to her honestly about what he was beginning to feel. And then, together, they would decide what came next. Penny stirred as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the broken window, casting prismatic patterns on the floor. She opened her eyes, momentarily confused, then smiled when she saw Virgil still in his chair, watching over her. "You didn't sleep," she observed, sitting up and brushing hair from her face. "I'll rest later," he assured her. "How do you feel?" "Better than I have any right to, given the circumstances," she replied with a self-deprecating smile. Her expression sobered as she took in the cabin in the clear light of morning, the broken window, the scratched message on the wall that Virgil hadn't been able to completely remove. "Jasper won't give up easily." "No," Virgil agreed, seeing no point in false reassurance. "But neither will we." Penny's eyes widened slightly at his use of "we," a flicker of hope crossing her features before she schooled them into neutrality. "Virgil, I can't ask you to keep risking yourself for me. Perhaps it would be best if I just continued on to Denver today, removed the danger from your home." "Is that what you want?" Virgil asked, studying her face carefully. "To leave?" Penny hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "What I want and what's wise are often different things." "That's not an answer," Virgil pressed gently. When she looked up again, there was a vulnerability in her eyes that caught at his heart. "No," she admitted softly. "I don't want to leave, but I'm afraid of what will happen if I stay." Virgil moved from his chair to sit beside her on the floor, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I've been thinking about that all night," he said, his voice low and steady. "About what it means that Jasper found us, about what might happen next, and I've realized something." "What's that?" Penny asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That I was alone before you came here, and I was content with that, or thought I was. But these past days with you have shown me what I was missing." Virgil took a deep breath, gathering courage for words he never thought he'd speak again. "I care for you, Penny. More than I should after so short a time, perhaps, but deeply nonetheless. And the idea of you leaving, of returning to that solitude." He shook his head. "I don't want that anymore." Penny's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. "I care for you too," she confessed. "So much that it frightens me. I never expected to feel this way again, or perhaps at all, since what I feel for you is different than anything I've known before." Virgil reached out hesitantly, his hand finding hers. "Then stay," he said simply. "Not just until it's safe to travel to Denver, but after. Stay here with me." The directness of his request surprised them both. It wasn't quite a proposal, it was too soon for that, both of them knowing that, despite the intensity of their feelings, they still had much to learn about each other. But it was an invitation to explore what might be possible between them, a door opened that neither had expected to find. "What about Jasper?" Penny asked, though her fingers had intertwined with his, a tacit acceptance of his offer. "He won't simply disappear." "No," Virgil agreed grimly. "But we have options. We could seek help from the territorial authorities. Jasper's actions last night were criminal. Or—" he hesitated, then continued, "we could leave, start fresh somewhere Jasper wouldn't think to look. I have some savings, enough to buy land elsewhere if needed." Penny looked around the cabin at the home Virgil had built with his own hands. "But you love this place. I couldn't ask you to leave it." "It's just land," Virgil said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "What matters is what we build together, wherever that might be." The simplicity and sincerity of his statement brought fresh tears to Penny's eyes. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." Before Virgil could respond, Bishop suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward alertly. A moment later they heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats, but different from the previous night. A single rider approaching at a steady pace. Virgil was on his feet instantly, revolver in hand. "Stay inside," he instructed Penny, moving to the window to peer out cautiously. What he saw was unexpected, a single rider indeed, but not one of Jasper's men. Instead, it was a woman on a dappled gray horse, her posture confident as she approached the cabin. "It's Martha," Virgil said in surprise, recognizing Amos Pearson's wife. "From Elk Creek." He stepped onto the porch as Martha reined her horse to a stop, her normally cheerful face grave with concern. "Virgil," she called in greeting. "Is Penny with you? Is she safe?" "She's here," Virgil confirmed, relaxing slightly but still wary. "What brings you all this way, Martha?" The older woman dismounted with practiced ease despite her years. "Trouble," she said bluntly. "That man Winters and his friends tore up half the saloon when they realized you'd both slipped away. Then yesterday, they came back to the store, threatened Amos until he told them which direction you'd headed." Her expression was apologetic. "He tried to send them east as you asked, but they didn't believe him." "It's not your fault," Virgil assured her, gesturing for her to come inside where Penny waited anxiously. "We suspected as much when they found us last night." "They were here?" Martha asked sharply, following him into the cabin. Her eyes widened at the evidence of destruction still visible despite their cleanup efforts. "Oh, my dears." Penny stepped forward to embrace the older woman. "We're unharmed," she assured Martha, though the cabin fared worse. Martha returned the embrace, then held Penny at arm's length, studying her with motherly concern. "Amos sent me to warn you they're planning something. After they left the store yesterday, they met with 2 more men who just arrived in town, hard-looking types, bounty hunters by the look of them. They were talking about coming back here today in force." A chill ran down Virgil's spine. "How many altogether?" "7 at least," Martha replied grimly. "Too many to fight, Virgil, even for a man with your skills." Penny's face had paled, but her voice remained steady. "Then we have to leave." "Now, before they arrive." Virgil nodded, his mind already calculating what they would need where they might go. "We can head west into the mountains. I know places they wouldn't find us easily." "That's just delaying the inevitable," Martha said, shaking her head. "What you need is to end this once and for all." She reached into her saddlebag and withdrew an official-looking document. "That's why Amos and I thought of this." Virgil took the paper, scanning it quickly. "A marriage certificate, blank but legal," Martha confirmed. "Amos is a justice of the peace, has been for 15 years. He authorized me to bring it, said if you two were willing, I could witness it and take the completed certificate back to be recorded officially." Penny looked bewildered. "How would that help?" "Because a married woman has certain legal protections," Martha explained, "particularly from claims by her former family. If you're Virgil's wife, Jasper has no standing to demand anything of you, not your person, not property from your previous marriage, nothing. And if he persists, Virgil would have clear legal grounds to defend you, as would the territorial authorities." Virgil and Penny exchanged glances, mutual shock evident in their expressions. What had been a tentative exploration of feelings just moments ago had suddenly accelerated to a life-altering decision. "It's rather sudden," Penny said carefully. Martha's expression softened with understanding. "Of course it is, dear. And I wouldn't suggest it if I thought there was another way. But Amos and I both saw how you looked at each other in Elk Creek, even after so short an acquaintance. Sometimes the heart knows quickly what the mind takes time to accept." Virgil set the certificate on the table, his thoughts in turmoil. Marriage was far beyond what he had been prepared to offer just minutes ago, yet the idea didn't fill him with the panic he might have expected. Instead, there was a certainty growing within him, a recognition that the path his life had been taking had irrevocably changed the moment he found Penny in his barn. "It's your choice," he said to Penny, his voice gentle. "I won't pressure you either way." Penny looked at the certificate, then back at Virgil, her eyes searching his face. "Would you regret it?" she asked softly. "Binding yourself to me, to my troubles, so quickly?" Virgil considered the question honestly, knowing she deserved nothing less. "No," he finally said. "I wouldn't regret it. What I said before stands. I care for you deeply. Whether that happens as husband and wife now, or as two people finding our way more gradually." He shrugged slightly. "The feeling remains the same." A slow smile spread across Penny's face, transforming it with a radiance that took Virgil's breath away. "Then yes," she said simply. "If you're willing, so am I." Martha beamed at them both, her eyes suspiciously moist. "Well then," she said briskly to cover her emotion, "let's make this official before those ruffians arrive." The ceremony, if it could be called that, was brief and unadorned. In the simple cabin with its broken window and scratched wall, with only Martha and Bishop as witnesses, Virgil and Penny exchanged vows that were no less heartfelt for their simplicity. They promised to care for and protect each other, to build a life together based on mutual respect and growing affection. When Virgil slid his mother's ring, the only family heirloom he had kept after leaving Virginia, onto Penny's finger, the look of wonder in her eyes was worth more than any elaborate wedding could have been. "By the authority vested in Amos through me," Martha concluded with a smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss they shared was gentle, tentative, a first step on a journey neither had anticipated but both now embraced. When they parted, Penny's cheeks were flushed, and Virgil felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. "The certificate needs both your signatures," Martha reminded them, "all business again. And mine as witness. Then I'll take it back to Amos to be recorded properly." As they signed the document, the reality of what they had done began to settle around them. They were married, bound together legally and, increasingly, emotionally. It was both overwhelming and strangely comforting. Now what? Penny asked once the certificate was safely in Martha's possession again. "Now you prepare," Martha said firmly. "Jasper and his men could arrive any time. You need to be ready to either defend yourselves or leave, depending on what seems wisest when they come." Virgil nodded, his tactical mind already assessing their options. "We'll pack essentials, have the horses ready. If there are too many to face safely, we'll head into the mountains until they give up the search." "And if they don't give up?" Penny asked, the practicality that had served her well on the farm now focused on their survival. "Then we'll seek help from the territorial authorities," Virgil decided. "With proof of your marriage to me and witnesses to Jasper's threats and destruction of property, they would have grounds to intervene." Martha nodded approvingly. "A sound plan." She glanced out the window at the position of the sun. "I should start back to Elk Creek if I'm to reach it before dark." "Amos will be worried." They walked her to her horse, thanking her for the risk she had taken in riding out to warn them. As she mounted, Martha fixed them both with a stern but affectionate gaze. "Take care of each other," she instructed. "And when this is all settled, come visit us in Elk Creek. I expect to see you both thriving." With a final wave, she rode off, the sound of her horses' hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Alone again, but now as husband and wife, Virgil and Penny stood for a moment in the yard, the enormity of the day's events washing over them. "Are you all right?" Virgil asked gently, noting the mix of emotions playing across Penny's face. She nodded, her hand finding his. "It's a lot to process, but I don't regret it." A small smile touched her lips. "Mrs. Hayden, it will take some getting used to." The sound of his name paired with hers affected Virgil more deeply than he had expected. "We have time," he assured her, "to get used to it, to learn each other. This may not be how either of us imagined marriage would begin, but we can make it what we want it to be." Penny's smile widened. Yes, she agreed. We can. Then, practicality reasserting itself, she added, but first, we need to prepare for Jasper. They spent the next few hours in efficient preparation, packing food, clothing, and essential tools, readying the horses, ensuring Virgil's weapons were clean and loaded. Throughout it all, they worked in a harmony that seemed remarkable given how recently they had met, anticipating each other's needs and complementing each other's strengths. By mid-afternoon, they were as prepared as they could be. If Jasper and his men arrived in force, Virgil and Penny would flee into the mountains, where Virgil's knowledge of the terrain would give them an advantage. If the confrontation could be handled more directly, they had the marriage certificate as legal protection and Virgil's determination to defend what was now his family. As they sat at the repaired table, sharing a simple meal that might be their last in the cabin for some time, Penny reached across and took Virgil's hand. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I want you to know that finding you or you finding me rather has been the greatest blessing of my life." Virgil squeezed her hand gently. "When I found you in the barn that night, with your Bible clutched to your chest, and I said you prayed me here, didn't you? I didn't know how true those words would prove to be." He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his features. "I think perhaps we were meant to find each other." "I believe that too," Penny replied, her green eyes bright with emotion. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The sound of approaching riders reached them before Bishop's warning bark. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace, not rushing but purposeful. "They're here," Virgil said grimly, standing and checking his revolver one final time. "Are you ready?" Penny nodded, her face set with determination as she gathered the small bag they had packed with essentials. "Ready." They moved to the window, peering out cautiously. 7 riders approached, just as Martha had warned Jasper in the lead, his 4 original companions behind him, and 2 unfamiliar men who had the hard, calculating look of men who hunted other men for money. "Too many to fight," Virgil murmured, his tactical assessment immediate. "We need to leave now while they're still far enough away that we can get a head start." They moved quickly to the back door, Virgil leading the way to where their horses waited, already saddled and loaded with supplies. Bishop followed silently, sensing the urgency in their movements. They had just reached the horses when a voice called from around the side of the cabin, "Going somewhere." And one of the unfamiliar men stepped into view, rifle aimed squarely at Virgil's chest. "Inside," the man ordered, gesturing with the rifle. "Winters wants to talk to you both." With no choice but to comply, Virgil and Penny allowed themselves to be herded back into the cabin, where Jasper and the others were already waiting, having entered through the front door. "Penelope," Jasper greeted her with mock cordiality, "you've led us on quite a chase." His gaze shifted to Virgil, hardening. "And you, Hayden, you've been harboring my brother's widow, interfering in family matters that don't concern you." "They concern me now," Virgil replied evenly, positioning himself slightly in front of Penny. "More than you know." Jasper's eyes narrowed at his tone. "Step aside. Penny's coming with me back to Kansas where she belongs. The farm needs tending and she has responsibilities there." "No," Penny said firmly, moving to stand beside Virgil rather than behind him. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Jasper. Not now, not ever." "You don't have a choice," Jasper snapped, his facade of civility cracking. "A woman alone has few options in this world, as I told you before. You'll come with me, willingly or otherwise." "She's not alone," Virgil stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded men in battle. "And she's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go." Jasper laughed harshly. "And who are you to stop me?" "Some rancher she's known for a few days. You have no standing here, Hayden." "I'm her husband," Virgil said simply. The declaration landed in the room like a physical blow. Jasper's expression froze, then contorted with disbelief and rage. "What did you say?" "We were married this morning," Penny confirmed, her hand finding Virgil's. "With a proper witness and certificate which is already on its way to be recorded officially." "That's impossible," Jasper sputtered. "It's a lie, a desperate attempt to, it's the truth," Virgil interrupted firmly. "Which means Penny is now legally my wife, under my protection, and any claim you thought you had on her or her property is null and void." Jasper's face had darkened with fury. "I don't recognize this so-called marriage," he spat. "William's been dead barely 6 months, and you've already given yourself to another man. You're nothing but a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Virgil warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his revolver before remembering it had been taken when they were captured. One of the bounty hunters stepped forward, his own weapon raised. "Easy now," he drawled. "Let's all stay calm and figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Jasper snapped. "She's coming with me, marriage or no marriage." "Actually," the bounty hunter said thoughtfully, "if they're legally married, that changes things." He glanced at his partner, who nodded in agreement. "We were hired to help retrieve a vulnerable widow being taken advantage of by a stranger, not to abduct a married woman from her lawful husband." Jasper turned on the man, incredulous. "You're backing out. After I paid you good money, we don't involve ourselves in matters that could bring the law down on us," the second bounty hunter explained with pragmatic detachment. "Interfering with a legal marriage is a line we don't cross." "A marriage of convenience," Jasper sneered. "Rushed through this morning when you realized I was coming. It won't stand up to scrutiny." "Perhaps not," a new voice agreed from the doorway. "But assault, destruction of property, and threatening a woman certainly won't stand up to scrutiny either." All heads turned to see Amos Pearson standing in the open doorway, a shotgun in his hands and 3 other men behind him, all armed. "Amos!" Virgil exclaimed in surprise. "How did you—" "Martha was worried," the storekeeper explained, his eyes never leaving Jasper and his men. "Thought you might need reinforcements, so I gathered some friends. Good thing, too, from the looks of it." Jasper's men shifted uneasily, clearly reassessing the situation now that they were no longer in control. The bounty hunters exchanged glances, then pointedly stepped away from Jasper, indicating their withdrawal from the conflict. "This doesn't concern you, old man," Jasper said to Amos, though his confidence had visibly faltered. "When someone threatens people I consider friends, it concerns me," Amos replied steadily. "Now, I suggest you and your men leave peacefully. The marriage is legal. I'm a justice of the peace, and my wife witnessed it. The certificate will be recorded by the time you reach Elk Creek, if you're inclined to check." "And if I refuse to leave without Penny," Jasper challenged, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Then we'll escort you to the territorial authorities," one of the men with Amos stated, his badge identifying him as some kind of lawman. "Your actions in Elk Creek alone would be enough for charges of disturbing the peace and destruction of property. Add in what you've done here, and the threats against Mrs. Hayden, and you're looking at serious consequences." The use of Penny's new name seemed to finally penetrate Jasper's obstinacy. He looked at her, standing confidently beside Virgil, her hand still in his, and something in his expression shifted a recognition, perhaps, that she was truly beyond his reach now. "This isn't over," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes, Jasper, it is," Penny replied with quiet finality. "Go back to Kansas. The farm is yours. I want nothing from that life anymore. I've found something better." For a moment, it seemed Jasper might argue further, but then his shoulders slumped slightly in defeat. "Let's go," he said to his men, not looking at Penny again. "There's nothing for us here." Under the watchful eyes of Amos and his friends, Jasper and his men filed out of the cabin. The bounty hunters followed, tipping their hats to Virgil and Penny in a gesture that might have been respect or simply acknowledgement of a game well played. Once they were gone, with the sound of their horses fading into the distance, Virgil finally allowed himself to breathe freely again. "Thank you," he said to Amos, clasping the older man's hand warmly. "Your timing couldn't have been better." "Martha would have had my hide if I'd let anything happen to you too," Amos replied with a chuckle. "Besides, she was so excited about the wedding, she could hardly contain herself when she told me." "Will they really leave?" Penny asked, concern still evident in her voice. "Or will Jasper try again?" "The sheriff here will make sure they head east, back toward Kansas," Amos assured her, indicating the badge-wearing man who had accompanied him. "And I took the liberty of sending telegrams to the authorities there, informing them of Jasper's actions. He won't find a warm welcome if he tries to use the law to pursue you further." Relief washed over Penny's face. "I don't know how to thank you. Both of you," she added, including Virgil in her grateful gaze. "No thanks necessary," Amos said warmly. "Just be happy together. That's all the thanks we need." After Amos and his friends departed, promising to check on them again in a few days, Virgil and Penny stood in the center of their cabin, for it was truly theirs now, a shared space, a home beginning to take shape around them. "It's over," Penny said softly, as if hardly daring to believe it. "Truly over." "Yes," Virgil agreed, drawing her gently into his arms, "and something new has begun." In the warm glow of the setting sun filtering through the windows of the cabin, they shared their second kiss as husband and wife, deeper than the first, filled with promise and growing affection. When they parted, Penny's eyes were bright with unshed tears of relief and happiness. "What happens now?" she asked, her hands resting lightly on Virgil's chest. He smiled, a full, unguarded smile that revealed the man he had been before war and loss had hardened him. "Now we begin, together." And so they did. Epilogue. 5 years later, the bakery door opened with a cheerful jingle, admitting a gust of crisp autumn air and a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face broke into a smile at the sight of the woman behind the counter. "There's my beautiful wife," Virgil said, crossing the polished wooden floor to kiss Penny's flour-dusted cheek. "Busy morning?" "Very," Penny replied with a happy sigh, gesturing to the nearly empty display cases. "We sold out of cinnamon rolls before 9, and Mrs. Henderson bought every last loaf of sourdough for her dinner party tonight." The small but thriving bakery, Penny's Place, had become a beloved fixture in the growing town of Silver Creek over the past 3 years. Located halfway between Virgil's ranch and what had once been Elk Creek, now expanded into a proper town, it represented the fulfillment of one of Penny's long-held dreams. "Papa." A small voice called from the back room, followed by the patter of little feet as 4-year-old Rebecca Hayden came running out, her dark hair in 2 neat braids and her green eyes so like her mother's bright with excitement. "Did you bring Bishop?" Virgil scooped up his daughter, swinging her into his arms with practiced ease. "He's waiting outside with the wagon," he confirmed, "along with a surprise for you and your brother." Rebecca's eyes widened. "What surprise?" "You'll have to wait and see," Virgil teased, tapping her nose gently. "Where is your brother, anyway?" "Reading with Uncle Amos," Rebecca replied, pointing toward the small sitting area in the corner of the bakery where the now-retired storekeeper sat with a book open on his lap and a 2-year-old boy leaning against him, listening with rapt attention. Amos looked up with a smile. "This young man has quite the appetite for stories," he observed as Virgil approached with Rebecca. "Takes after his mother in that regard." "And his father in others," Penny added, coming to join them after serving the last customer of the morning. She smoothed a hand over her son's dark hair, so like Virgil's in color and texture. "James has your patience, Virgil, and your kindness." The pride in her voice when she spoke of their children never failed to warm Virgil's heart. The family they had created together, first tentatively, then with growing confidence and deepening love, had become the center of his world in a way he had never imagined possible on that stormy night when he found Penny in his barn. "Are we ready to go?" he asked, looking at Penny. The wagons loaded with everything for the picnic. The family picnic had become a tradition on the anniversary of their wedding, a day spent by the lake near their ranch, enjoying each other's company and reflecting on how far they had come. "Just let me get my shawl and lock up," Penny replied, her eyes twinkling. "Unless you've forgotten what day it is." Virgil's expression softened. 5 years, he said quietly. "How could I forget?" While Penny prepared to close the bakery for the day, Virgil chatted with Amos, who had become like family to them over the years. After Martha's passing 2 winters ago, the older man had moved to Silver Creek to be closer to the Haydens, taking a small apartment above the bakery and becoming an honorary grandfather to Rebecca and James. "Will you join us for the picnic, Amos?" Virgil asked as James climbed into his father's arms to join his sister. Amos shook his head with a smile. "Not today. This is for your family. Besides," he added with a wink, "I have a chess game scheduled with Doc Wilson. The old buzzard thinks he can beat me this time." Outside, Bishop, now graying around the muzzle but still spry, greeted them enthusiastically, while the children squealed with delight at the surprise Virgil had brought. A small pony cart attached to a gentle Shetland pony named Buttercup, just the right size for Rebecca to learn to drive under her parents' supervision. As they rode toward the ranch that had grown and prospered under their joint care, Virgil glanced at Penny beside him on the wagon seat, her profile outlined against the golden autumn landscape. The years had added subtle changes, tiny laugh lines around her eyes, a quiet confidence in her bearing that came from being truly valued and loved, but the essence of her remained the same as that determined young woman he had found in his barn, clinging to her Bible and her hope for a better future. "What are you thinking?" Penny asked, catching his gaze. "That you were right," Virgil replied, taking her hand in his. "That day in the barn when I asked if you had prayed me there." Penny's smile deepened, understanding immediately. "I did pray for guidance, for protection," she acknowledged. "But I never dared to pray for all of this for you, for our children, for the life we've built." "Sometimes we get more than we pray for," Virgil observed, squeezing her hand gently. "And sometimes what seems like chance, a woman sleeping in a barn during a storm, a man who happens to find her, is actually something else entirely." "Providence," Penny suggested, the faith that had sustained her through difficult times now a shared foundation of their marriage. "Love," Virgil corrected softly, "finding its way to us both when we least expected it." As the wagon crested the hill, their ranch came into view, the original cabin now expanded into a comfortable home, the barn rebuilt and enlarged, the cattle herd thriving in the pastures beyond. It was everything Virgil had dreamed of building, made infinitely more meaningful by the family with whom he shared it. "Happy anniversary, my love," Penny said, leaning against his shoulder. "Happy anniversary," Virgil replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The first of many more to come." Behind them, Rebecca and James chattered excitedly about the picnic ahead. Bishop barked joyfully at a passing rabbit, and the autumn sun bathed the landscape in golden light. It was, Virgil thought, exactly as it should be the answer to a prayer neither of them had known they were making until that stormy night 5 years ago when chance, or fate, or providence had brought them together, and he was grateful for every moment of it.